Hey guys, for this tutorial I want to go over the move command feature in Illustrator and how that can be applied in a real world setting. Also want to go over custom patterns and creating custom swatches as well as brushes. And also want to touch base a little bit about trapping. I may end up creating a second video just for trapping depending on how long this gets, okay? So let's get started. So with the move command feature, I'm going to create a checkerboard pattern. So for that, I'm going to use my rectangle tool, and I'm going to set a color stroke of none. And I want to change my color fill to red. Now I'm going to double click on the rectangle, then click once on the document, and I want to create a 1 inch by 1 inch square. Now with the move command feature, it moves your object within the page by a specific amount of distance that you requested. So I'm going to create a checkerboard pattern using that feature. So I'm going to select my object and go to the objects menu on top, hit a transform, move, or Command Shift M. Now since I have a 1 inch by 1 inch, I'm going to tell it to move on a horizontal plane by 1 inch, vertical plane of 0, and copy it. I don't want, if I hit OK, it will literally move or jump over to 1 inch. But in this particular case, I'm going to copy my selection. So notice that it created a new one, copied it over at exactly 1 inch in length, and I'm going to color that one black. The beautiful thing about this feature is if you zoom in on the edges and I view it in outline view mode, that path is literally sitting on top of each other. So the left side of the red box is sitting directly on top of the path on the right box on the left side here. So these two paths are literally touching each other. They're overlapping, and it avoids from having any kind of gap. So Command 0 to fit window, Command Y, outline view mode. So now I'm going to select them both and go back to the objects menu and say transform, move again, but this time I have two of them, so 1 + 1 is 2 inches. Hit copy, and it copies both of them, but this time I'm going to hit Command D to repeat my last step, and now guys I have my little checkerboard pattern. So now I'm going to select all this object, go to object, transform, move again, do a 0 on a horizontal, but only 1 inch on a vertical, because now I want to go down, and hit copy. Now I want to mirror this effect, or I can just rotate it 180 degrees, but I want to show you the mirror feature, and that is inside where the rotate tool is located. So you click on the reflect tool, double click on that, hit your preview, and there you go. So I want it at 90 degrees mirror angle, so I'll hit OK. I don't need a copy, I just hit OK. And now I have my checkerboard pattern. So to complete the pattern, select all, object, transform, move again, do 2 inches this time, and hit copy. And then Command D to repeat that pattern. Now if you view it in outline view mode, look how nice and clean your overlapping paths are. You have 0 gaps whatsoever. So that's a manual way of creating a pattern such as this. Okay. Now the move feature, when I worked in large format digital printing companies, I used that a lot for generating my artboards. So here I downloaded a photograph from the Google, and my document is set to 60 inches wide by 48 inches tall. Now I can print this on two 48 inch by 96 inch boards, just so that I can create what is called a panel match. So I'm going to lock that down, create a new layer, and this is going to be my splice layers. So then I would create a rectangle and tell it, so I'm going to split this into two panels, so it's 60 inches wide, so my board, or my artboard, excuse me, my box is going to be 30 inches by 48. I'm going to align that to the left and to the top. So now I use my move command feature by going to the object, transform, move, and tell it to move 30 inches, none on the vertical, and I'm going to copy it. So now I have two boards. So here's the beauty about this. I can serve this as my cut path, but then I can take the boards here and transform that into artboards. By double clicking on it, converts that artboard into one board, and I click on this here once on this part, and I have a secondary artboard. Now I don't need these paths again. Then I can go into my file, document setup, and tell it to create a bleed of 125 of an inch. And now if I sent this to print, I have an overlap of my image here. So I'll have page 1 and page 2. So if I go file print, notice that I can do a fit to page. So here's page 1 and here's page 2 now. And that will create my panel match and my panel split in large format printing. So this gets printed directly onto a substrate like a 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch white Sintra, and it gets cut out. Obviously the image would have to be slightly larger so I can have a bleed. And then this is how we did in the convention centers and created and printed directly onto substrates and have panel matches. If you ever go into a convention center, you see these large booths that has all these panel splits and they all matched up perfectly like this. This is how it gets done. And again, the move feature is perfect, absolutely perfect for creating these kinds of effects. All right, so moving along. Now let's create custom patterns. We can create our own patterns here. And in Illustrator, ever since version 6, they updated the pattern format. So I'm going to show you the old way of how we used to do patterns. You're going to need your swatches palette out, so bring that up. Now Illustrator comes with already built-in certain patterns, like you have this little pattern effect here, and you also have this little foliage pattern, okay? But we can create our own. So let's say that I have, I'm just going to create like this little elliptical. And I'm just going to call it, just color it black. I don't need to fill it with a pattern, okay? So any kind of object that you drag and drop into the swatches palette will automatically be a pattern. You can even do that with resolution-dependent images. You can place a photograph or a file, and as long as you drag it into the swatches palette, it'll automatically be converted into a pattern fill. I don't recommend doing that, though, with the photographs because it will create it'll have a hard time rendering and can even crash your document. So I can just take this little circle that I created, drag it and drop it into my swatches palette, and it'll automatically be seen as a pattern fill. So if I enlarge this and I select my little dot here to fill it with my new pattern swatch, then it's going to just tile that pattern all the way inside my object. Now I can also scale it. If I scale my object, notice that my pattern does not scale with it. Only the object itself gets scaled down. But I can change that feature by double-clicking into the scale tool, and I can say transform pattern here. Make sure that is checked. But if let's say that I do not want to transform my object, so I uncheck that and say I want that pattern to be 250%. If I hit the tab key, then it's going to scale my pattern alone and not scale my object. Now, if I want my object to scale, obviously, then everything enlarges to 250%. If I want it to be at 50%, so there you go. If I uncheck my object and my pattern, then I'll uncheck the object, then the pattern itself will only be the one that's transformed because I tell it to just transform the pattern. So I'm going to cancel that. Now, that applies to any kind of pattern that you create. So that's the old school way of doing it. But let's say that you want to control and manipulate, for example, like the space between these dots. You want this to look like like some kind of a halftone screen pattern. So what I do is, I'm going to delete that. Let's recreate that little circle again and give it a regular fill of black. There we go. Here is the new, cancel. Here is a new method of creating your own custom patterns. You go into the view, I think, or is it the window? Pattern options down the bottom, right underneath the Pathfinder. Pattern options. Bring up that palette. And now we're going to talk about this. Let me move this over a little bit. Center that if I can. All right. So to convert this into a pattern when you can actually manipulate and make personal adjustments, bring up the pattern options palette up from the window. Click in the little drop-down menu list and select Make Pattern. And it's going to give you this message, hit OK, don't show again. Now it's going to take you into the isolation mode here, the pattern editing mode. Now notice that all these other ones that are grayed out, that's just a preview. And the center one that is highlighted, that is your original art file. And of course here you can give it your name. I'm going to call it dots. No. The OTS dots. All right. Now you can tell it what kind of pattern do you want, like the tiling. How should it tile? Here you have these options. You can do a brick by row, you can do a brick by columns, and so on and so forth. I kind of like the brick by row, but you can play around with some of these settings here. And this one here gives you the amount of offset. So let's say that right now it's like close to 1/4 of an inch. Let's say if I want them to be 375, separated in this direction, and also 0.375, which is about 3/8 of an inch, and it gives you a preview of what that looks like, okay? So that kind of looks really cool to me. This here just says that that the dim setting, which is the preview, it's at 70%. And this shows you in a 5x5 space. You can tell it to say, well, how does it look in a closer space, like a 3x3? Or if I want to do a 1x3 and so on and so forth, or a 9x9 that gives you a much larger preview. So this is just viewing options. Overlaps, you can play around with some of these settings, but for now, I'm going to leave it like this. And I'm going to say done. When I'm finished and I'm satisfied with my pattern, I'll just click on done. And now notice that it creates my new pattern here that I call the dots in the swatches palette. So I can take the original, I can enlarge it and fill it with that pattern, and notice how it looks much more like a, I don't know, like pop art, if you will, or a halftone dot system. And the same rules apply. You want to scale it, you use your scale tool feature, transform the pattern, not the object, and yeah, play around with some of these settings. It's a lot of fun. Patterns are awesome. You can take a photograph, like I said, bring it in, or some kind of a texture or wallpaper, but please be careful when you're doing things like that. It won't necessarily tile it properly. Different colors, and you can definitely see the separations, but you do have that option. All right, guys, so the next thing I want to talk about is brushes. So I got my brushes palette out. You don't have your brushes palette, go to Window, scroll down to where you see brushes, and it'll show up. We're going to create, there are different kinds of brushes that you can create. You can create an art brush, bristle brush, pattern brush. I'm going to show you how you can do each one of these. Most of these are just your basic drawing brushes and stuff, but if you go down into the drop-down list, select new brush. Right now I want to show you what a calligraphy brush looks like. You can also do a bristle brush and a pattern brush. These other two won't be available to you unless you take an object and you drag it in there. Then you'll have all these other options available to you. But for now, I'm going to select the calligraphy brush and hit OK. And then you got all these options here to choose from. So I'm just going to call it my callig brush. And you can change the angles, the features. You can say select it to be random. The random is great if you have like a Wacom tablet. You can adjust pressure settings. I'm going to leave it as fixed, and let's say that I want an angle of, I don't know, like maybe 23% or 29%. My roundness, I can change that to be a little bit more of an oblong shape here. 9 points, and I can make it a little larger, so you can adjust the settings in that case, and hit OK to apply. I'm going to say a fill or a pattern fill of none, stroke of black. And this is the calligraphy brush that I just created. So I can take my brush tool here, and I can start drawing my own designs from my brush. If I'm not satisfied with this, I can double click on it and adjust it, select my preview button if I will, and say that maybe I want a little bit more of an angle, or if I want the roundness to be less thicker, and change the size, and I can see the effects that it creates. So I'll hit OK to apply, and then it's going to give you this error message if you want it to apply to the existing strokes or leave the existing strokes. But I'm going to apply it to the existing strokes. If I hit leave strokes, then this will be for the very first setting that I set. If I hit apply to the strokes, then it's going to update everything in the document. So I'm going to update everything. So there you go. So now let's say that I can take this calligraphy brush that I created, and I can just start drawing calligraphy type text and create my own fonts that way. So that's awesome. You can also use it for drawing. So I can take my brush tool, select my calligraphy brush that I create, and start drawing any kind of like illustration that you see. Hold on, that looks terrible. Let's try that again. I can do better than that. So I'm going to create There we go. Now again, I'm using the mouse. I don't have a Wacom tablet. And let's say that I want something like, there you go, I'm trying to draw a horse. And there's a nostril. There's the eyes. And there we go. Now you get the idea. Yep. A unicorn. Anyways, so that's one of the really cool things that you can do. You can also create your own kind of brushes by using an object. So I'm going to draw my own oval as opposed to calling it out in here. Okay. So let's say that I want that oval. Now, depending on the thickness of the oval is the thickness of the brush that you create. So I'm going to take that, drag it and drop it, and this time it's going to give me my own options. Let's say I'm going to do an art brush. So I'm going to leave it as an art brush. I'm going to hit OK. Then it's going to give me additional options. So I'm going to call this my art brush. Okay. So then I'm going to, you can do all these different settings, play around with some of these. You can change the different kinds of methods. You can flip it along the path and so on. Again, I have this set as a fixed setting. So I'm just going to hit OK and leave it as default. And it's going to show up as one of these here. Let's see this one. This is my art brush. So this is my custom art brush. So I'm going to hit delete, grab my brush tool again, and say no fills. So now this is what my art brush looks like, which is kind of no different than your calligraphy brush, but you can create your own custom brushes that way. This is a good idea for creating, like drawing hair on a portrait. And you can set those also to different opacities. So let's say that I can select these here and change it to a different opacity and then overlap them. And then it looks like I'm creating some kind of hair on an art, and just set it off to different opacities that way. Cool. And then you can have different kinds of brushes with different sizes for midtones, highlights, and so on. So I just have this set to an opacity, and it creates this beautiful pattern here. Outline view mode just looks like a lot of strokes. Okay. Select all, delete. All right. So the next one I'm going to show you is called a pattern brush. Let's say that I want to create a slinky effect. Yeah, I want to create my own little slinky. So for that, I'm going to use another oval, but instead of black, I want to color that like a metallic color, like a gray color. And let me see, what does the thickness look like? Maybe like 2 points, thick stroke. All right, that'll go. Maybe a little smaller. All right, so I'm happy with that. So I'm going to create a little slinky. I think it should be a little bit thicker, maybe 2, 3 points. There we go. So I'm going to create a chain link effect or a slinky. So I'm going to click, drag it and drop it in there. Oops, it didn't quite go in there. So click, drag it and drop it inside my swatches, my brushes, and say a pattern brush. This time I'm going to do a pattern brush. I'm going to hit OK to apply. Now it's going to give me these options. I'm going to call this my pattern brush. So I can tell it to end in a auto between, and everything else looks okay to me. I can tell it to scale different sizes or gives me a little preview. So I'm happy with that. So I'm going to hit OK to apply. And this time I'm going to create a little bouncing path. So I'm going to start with my corner point here and draw a path like this. And then tell it to fill in with my little pattern brush. So now my little slinky pattern is going to fill in along that path. I've seen a lot of students do this effect by, let's say that one student created one set of railroad tracks and then drew the railroad track once, created a pattern brush, and then just drew a path, and then selected their little railroad path and created the little chain. I had another student who did the same thing with just chain links. They drew the chain links once, drag it into the brushes, set it to a pattern brush, and they had a bunch of chain links scattered throughout their entire design. And all they had to do is draw that chain link once. View it in outline view mode. There you go. You just see the vector paths. But you can also, if you want to have access to all these anchor points, you have to expand the appearance by going into the Objects menu and click on Expand Appearance. So what it does is it literally just breaks it apart. So if I click on Expand Appearance, now I can view this in Outline View mode, and now I have access to all the vector paths. Since these were done with the strokes, take it to another step further, I can select it, change all my strokes to Object, go to Path, outline my strokes. Now notice that it changed to a fill color and a stroke of none. And if I view this in Outline View mode, now I have just paths and not just strokes. See? Before, after. There you go. So that's pretty cool. Again, you can do that, any kind of effects and stuff like that, you can do that with the strokes effect. Let me get into symbols real quick. Symbols, I like to call that, actually no, let's hold off on that real quick. Let me finish the process. The next thing I want to do is show you how to create a scatter brush effect. And now that's when I bring in my symbols. So here's my symbols here. I like to call symbols my little personal clip arts, just like a clip art library, because I kind of learned how to hack these things. So let's say that in the symbols palette, you can click on the drop-down list and sit open symbols libraries. Guys, check it out. You have access to all of these here. The one that I like the most is called Mad Science, because I use this one, and this one in particular, to create my own little registration marks. Notice that when I click on it, it shows up into my main symbols palette. So I can click it on it, hold down the mouse, and choose the Option key and drag it out. And now I have access to it. But if I go to Outline View mode, here are all the paths, but I don't necessarily can select the anchor points. So guess what? Object, expand, and hit OK to expand the objects and the fills. Now, check it out. Now I have the anchor points, and I can manipulate this any way I want. So I usually just use this little red portion. I cut it, get rid of the rest, Command F, paste in front. And I tend to use this as my own personal registration marks when I used to do plotter cuts in the vinyl shop for anything that needed to get tiled. So I love, love, love these symbols. So let's go ahead and use this one as an example so I can create a scatter brush effect. Another one that you can use under the symbols, open symbols library, and you can use nature, and you can use, like, let's use this little butterfly. So hold down the Option key, drag it out, Option, Object menu, expand, have all access to the vector paths. Let's get rid of this little triangle. Excuse me, the rectangle, double click on it, double select, excuse me, not double select, to hit the delete key twice. I selected the anchor point from the corner with the indirect selection tool, and I deleted it. All right, so let's hold off on this one. Let's use the butterfly for example. Let's just bring that a little smaller. All right, so for this, I want to show you the pattern brush, the scatter brush. I click, drag it, and drop it in there, and this time I want it scatter brush here. I already showed you the art brush, I already showed you the calligraphy brush, I already showed you the pattern brush. Let's talk about the scatter brush. So hit OK. It literally does what it means. It scatters or disperses the image along the path, but you can select how you disperse it. Right now I'm just going to randomly select any of these colors just so I can see what my effect is going to look like. And this one I'm going to call it my scatter brush. Hit OK to apply. Now it shows up here. There's my little butterfly. Set that to a side. So now I need to create a path. So I'm just going to draw a line along that path and select my butterfly. And it literally didn't do much because I just did it all random. So I'm going to select this, select my preview. Now I can tell it to rotate. Let's do random. Let's do that random, random, random. And now I can see how that starts to scatter around. Let's do my rotate around a bit. And you can change the scaling on some, scaling a little bit on the others. And it literally just disperses it along that path. And you can change some of these to be a smaller rate, these to be a little larger. And play around with these things, guys, because it's a lot of fun to manipulate these items. I've seen students use this feature with like fallen leaves. You can do it with butterflies. You can do it with just about anything that you draw on the page, and apply to the stroke. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So then I can take my indirect selection tool, select the path. I can even add an extra anchor point to that. And I can tell with my direct selection tool to move that path, and notice how things get scattered along that path. I can use my convert tool, tell it to curve along that path, and then the butterflies get dispersed as it updates with the path. Yeah. And all I had to do is draw it once. That's what these brushes are so amazing. You just draw it once and let the program do the rest for you. Okay, so I didn't really need that. So yeah, and here's the original butterfly. Can you imagine just drawing it once and then changing all this manually? Is such a huge time. It's time consuming as hell. Whereas you can create your own pattern brush, scatter brush, and it does it for you all along the path. So view, outline view mode, that's all it is. Command Y again. Now, if you want to have access to each one of these now, and let's say that you want to modify each butterfly and give it each a different color, then you can go to Object, Expand Appearance, and now you have access to the vector paths. And let's say that there may be one or two of these butterflies you want it to be a different color, so you can just select that particular butterfly and say, well, instead of that color, I want it to be this color, and have it be that color. And change it around accordingly. Okay? All right. So that is brushes in a nutshell. Let's see if I forgot to do one. So I'm going to go Create, New Brush. Yes, that would be the Bristled Brush. I already showed you each one of these. Now let's talk about the Bristled Brush. The Bristled Brush is your own personal little art brush. And when it draws with the Bristled Brush, it draws it with a transparency effect. I'm going to call this My. Why? Because I'm selfish. All right, My. So you can tell it to do round. You can do a fan. So just about any of these brushes that you would see in a painter's palette, you have access to these types of brushes. The rounded fan brush is a fan. Ha, no pun intended. But you can change the sizes of the actual thickness of the stroke. You can change the thickness of the bristles, the opacity. You want it to be more transparent. The stiffness of it, just play around with some of these settings. So I'm going to leave it as this right here. And you can select any color that you want. So right now I have a red color fill, and I'm going to use my paintbrush tool. And this is the one that I created, and I can create these kinds of effects and literally paint using that tool. If I want a different color, then obviously just to go into the swatches palette, select a different color and paint over that. Different color again, paint over that. If I want it a little thicker, then I can select a different brush and so on, and create these kinds of effects. It looks like a watercolor technique because they're all into transparencies, right? All right, guys, so those are the brushes in a nutshell. There's plenty more information on your textbooks if you need to look over that.